The Spartan Bowl in Connersville, Indiana, where high school basketball still rules.
We would fill that 5,000 seat gym just about every Friday, Saturday night. And it was just so much fun to have something that the entire community would rally around.
Betsy Ross's hometown of Connersville is where, as a young girl, she realized journalism was her destiny. One of her broadcast stops, Indiana's capital city, as a main anchor in the late 80s on WTHR Indianapolis.
Live from the heart of Indiana, this is News Center 13 at 6 o'clock with Tom Cochran, Betsy Ross.
Good evening, I'm Betsy Ross. Hardy says no more ghost blasters. On News Center 13 tonight, we'll tell you why.
She moved on to break barriers as a female anchor and sports reporter, perhaps most notably at ESPN. Ball State University graduate Betsy Ross on her roles as a pioneer for women in journalism, NIL, and what she's up to now on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. This week we showcase a born and bred female broadcast pioneer from right here in the Hoosier State, Betsy Ross. Born and raised in Connersville, a Ball State grad with ties to Notre Dame and several years anchoring at WTHR in Indianapolis. Here's Business and Beyond host Gary Dick and his conversation with Betsy Ross.
And I'm really pleased to be joined on the podcast this week by Betsy Ross, the president of Game Day Productions, also very well known to a lot of listeners, a longtime sports and news anchor, including a stop in Indianapolis. Betsy, how are you?
I am doing well. How are you guys doing?
Doing great, doing great. Hey, you are very busy, you continue to be very busy, and thought I'd lead off with the fact that you recently received quite an honor at your alma mater, Ball State University, with the unveiling of the Betsy M. Ross SportsLink studio. Tell me what that's all about.
They do such good work at SportsLink, and I always tell the now former dean there, Paige Turner, I said, I am so jealous of these kids that get to do all of this. You know, when I was there, you were on the yearbook staff and you were on the newspaper staff, and really, that was about it if you were on the journalism side. Now, that's where I was the journalism side. David Letterman had not graced us yet with his donation for telecommunications. So those were really the only opportunities that we had on the journalism side to really do anything outside of the classroom. But now there are so many opportunities, and SportsLink really is the way that the university promotes its athletic department. And besides that, they get amazing experience. They work on the NCAA tournaments. They work on the Olympics. They just put together a documentary. They went to Cardiff in Wales and did a documentary on athletes of all abilities there and how athletics really brings that area together. I mean, it's an old industrial rundown city, but how athletics really brings everyone together. And they interviewed everybody from a gold medalist in the Olympics down to special needs athletes. And that kind of experience just sets these students up for success. Once they graduate, they have such an opportunity and they have such great experience that translates into really whatever they want to do now. And so any way that I could support that, I'm glad to do it. I am so thankful that I have the ability to do it, but they just do such good work there. And it's my honor to help support them because these youngsters, these students really come out of there prepared for communications. And as we know, the communications world changes dramatically. Every other day, there's something new. There's something else that they have to learn, that they have to know, that they have to develop. And so this really gives them the opportunity to do that. So anyway, I can support them. I'm just grateful that I can do it, and I'm honored that they were able to name that studio.
Yeah, you got your undergraduate degree there at Ball State. Later got a graduate degree at Notre Dame. Was Ball State, was that the spark for your entree into journalism?
I was one of these kids who was very, very lucky. I knew in 6th grade what I wanted to do.
Really?
Period.
Wow. Yeah.
And that doesn't always happen. And it was one of these things that I was always interested in reading, in words, in writing. And I remember the day my sister was at the dentist in Richmond, Indiana. And my mother and I were in the waiting room, and the receptionist came over, and she was just making chit chat. And she looked at me and she goes, "Oh, are you going to be a teacher like your sister?" And I said, "You know what? I want to get into journalism." And that's the first time that I had actually said it out loud. And I think I shocked my mother when I said that, because she figured I was going to go ahead and teach, which I did do and am doing now. But I think that was the first time that I verbalized it. So I want to get into journalism because I thought it was so cool when the president was giving a news conference and he would call on reporters and he would call on them by name. And I thought, if I'm a reporter, the president knows my name.
Right.
How cool is that? So, that was my, link that, okay, if I'm a reporter, the president's going to know who I am. Well, probably not, but it certainly really sparked what I wanted to do. And so I took the typical route, did journalism in high school, again, the newspaper and the yearbook, and then was able to go to Ball State because Ball State always has had and still does, has a great journalism department. And as we know, they put journalism, telecommunications, and PR and everything into the media, information and media. And so it was just a wonderful opportunity to be able to take that passion that I had when I was in grade school and really develop it and go to Ball State and be able to major in it. It was just a wonderful opportunity. And I was familiar with Ball State because my sister did go there and she got her teaching degree, got her LEd degree there. And so I was familiar with it, and it was an easy transition.
Yeah. Did you always anticipate going into TV, or did you kind of start out on the print route?
Started out in the print route. I was going to be an investigative reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times.
Okay.
I had specifics.
You had goals,
I wasn't fooling around. I did. I had specifics. And so, again, going back to Ball State, it was my final quarter. We were on quarters then. And I was getting my teaching degree. And the counselor said, okay, you can go back to Connersville High School, my alma mater. You can go back to Connersville. You can student teach. So you can teach 2 classes in journalism and 2 classes in English. And that was my minor. And I said, between you and me and the fence post, I'm never going to teach English. So what else you got? Yeah. And he said, well, Connersville has this new radio and television program. They did, the usual announcements that you have at homeroom. Well, theirs was video. Theirs was a newscast. They did a 15-minute live newscast that the students wrote, the students anchored. They produced VOs, voiceovers. They produced packages, just like a newscast. I said, okay, I will teach that. How hard can it be? Never had taken a radio and television class, of course, in my life. So I went to Connersville High School. I was basically reading the book before I taught the class in radio and television. So I would be at least one day ahead of the students. I would go out with the students. We would shoot, we would edit, we were doing interviews, we were doing all these things and, learning how to put together packages and stuff. And I was learning it along with the students. And I go, great. It is my last quarter of my last year at Ball State. And I find something that really clicked.
Yep.
I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than the students did. I learned as much or more than the students. I so enjoyed what I was doing there. And I thought, great. Well, it's a little late now, but at least I figured it out, while I was still in college. So that was really my impetus to go back to graduate school and be in communication arts and take all the radio and television classes that I could just to get that experience, because I figured out that I really liked that. I really enjoyed it. So that's really what I thought that, okay, this is a great way of storytelling, and it's immediate. Newspapers come out in the morning, they come out in the afternoon. back then, of course, there was no web, there was no social, there was no other way for a newspaper to get the news out. So looking at television, I got, this is an immediate way to do a story, and you can update it. And if it's big enough, you break in. And so I looked at it as a way to be able to tell stories in a more timely manner, is to do it, through television.
Yeah, you started out in news. I think you were in South Bend. What do you remember? Because I certainly remember you as a news anchor here at Channel 13 in Indianapolis. What do you remember about your time in Indy?
It was such a great time. It was so much fun. And I always tell people that that's really where I got my first full-time experience in sports, even though I was a news anchor. As you know, so much of the news of the day in Indianapolis is sports.
Yep.
Still is. We're talking about it every day. And so that was really the cool thing about it, that I was able to really fuel my love of sports. I mean, when I was there, we had the Pan Am Games. I mean, how amazing was that? We had Olympic trials. We had so much going on there. And so it was really so much fun to be able to cover that on the news side, but it kind of, fueled my Jones for sports as well. And, you look back at I don't want to say founding fathers, but they kind of were, that put a stake in the ground 50, 60 years ago and said, Indianapolis is going to be an amateur athletic hub. It is going to be the capital. And this is what we have to do it. And they had the vision, and they got people on board. And just think of what they planned, and it has all come about right now. I mean, look at Indianapolis. Look at this year. You had All-Star Weekend for the NBA. You've had the Scouting Combine. You've had the Horizon League tournaments. You've had the NCAA basketball tournaments. You had the NIT. You had the women's NIT. You've had so many things going on. That's not even counting the Pacers and the Colts and the Fever.
And
just wrapped up
the swim trials, where they built 2 pools, Olympic-sized pools, inside Lucas Oil Stadium. I still can't believe that one.
I know. And just think of the vision that they had. Mayor Hudnut and all those folks just must be so happy, because this is what they had envisioned for Indianapolis and central Indiana, and what that economic impact has been. I mean, this spring, we partnered with Ball State to do an economic impact of Caitlin Clark and what that means. And it means millions of dollars. It means jobs. It means more people coming in to central Indiana. And we are so fortunate in central Indiana to have her be, kind of the face, not only obviously of the Fever, but to bring as much attention as she has to the WNBA. And it adds a coolness factor to our area. I mean, I remember when the Colts traded for Eric Dickerson. And Eric Dickerson came to Indianapolis, and all I could think of was, I'm living in the same town as Eric Dickerson. Because, he was like all that and more. Star running back at SMU, went to the Rams, broke all kinds of records. I mean, he was it. And he came to Indianapolis, and I go, I'm living in the same town as Eric Dickerson. There is a coolness factor that comes with that. With having somebody like a Caitlin Clark be in your home area, and what she has meant, and how she has elevated the team, the league, the entire league. I mean, a rising tide. And, it has just meant so much for not just Indianapolis, but for the entire area to have that kind of attention.
Yeah. We'll talk about your time at ESPN, but I want to get your take as you look at local news or local sports coverage, because certainly the news business, the content business, as I know you would agree, has changed dramatically over the years. What's your assessment of local sports coverage today versus 20 years ago? I mean, very evident that stations spend a lot of money to cover sports and to do things and to send reporters and anchors, on the road. And that investment just doesn't seem to be there, or an investment in time on newscasts. It seems like a different animal. And I don't know if the ESPN or the national sports landscape has changed that, but your take on local sports coverage.
Well, I think that is obviously the advantage that you have. You're local. You can get the Red score or the Pacers score anywhere. But your advantage is that you are local. And so I think that the first thing is that any successful local sports department, you have to focus on the local. You have to focus on the high schools, because mom and dad and grandma are always going to watch. You focus on the high schools. You focus on the local colleges and universities that, let's face it, aren't necessarily going to be on ESPN every week, but it doesn't mean that they're not great athletes as well. So you focus on that too. And I think that going back to COVID, and that's a whole nother podcast that we can talk about, but going back to COVID, there are so many changes that happened because of COVID. And one of them was that if there's a ball game, ESPN didn't necessarily send their crew to the game. ESPN had everybody broadcast either from a studio in Bristol or a studio in New York. And they watched it on the monitor just like you and I would watch it on the monitor, and called the game. Slowly but surely, crews have been back on the road, but I don't think that is going away, to have your crew just be in the studio and call the games. And yes, it's a money factor. That's a lot to do with it. You do lose something by not having your crew there at the stadium, at the ballpark, but it's a money factor. And I just wonder what's going to happen. As we know, whatever a conference is going to look like in the future, is there going to be one or two, or how is that going to work? But, let's take the Big Ten, for example, because we're in the middle of Big Ten country. So it literally goes from one coast to the other. So if I'm Rutgers and I'm sending my soccer team to California to play, first of all, the expense that you have now to send that soccer team all the way across country to UCLA, the expense is going to be pretty dramatic for these schools. Yes, I know that the television contracts will give everybody more money, but you just wonder what's going to happen to some of these so-called Olympic sports. And what these schools are going to do. Are they going to take another look at their Olympic sports and say, you know what, we can't afford to send fill in the blank team all across the country to play in this particular conference? And that's what these conferences are doing now. They're not regional conference, like the old Southwest Conference. Southwest Conference used to be in the Southwest.
Right.
The ACC used to be up and down the Atlantic coast. I think that conferences should get away with numericals and geographic. Any kind of reference like that in their names, because, the Big Ten is not the Big Ten anymore, and the ACC isn't the Atlantic Coast Conference anymore. But, you just wonder what it's going to mean for some of these Olympic sports. That will the schools take another look at it and say, we just can't afford to send you all across the country to play a sport that we know is not revenue generating. And my thought is that may be a lost opportunity for especially some of the women's sports. And, will they be modified? Will some of them, like for example, if I'm just making this up, say, for example, that your school has lacrosse and your conference really doesn't have enough women's lacrosse teams. So you'll bump to a Big East, or you'll bump to another conference. And maybe you have that. Maybe you will see some of these Olympic sports go to another conference instead of flying all the way across, the country. maybe that's the way that they afford it, that they, bump them down or bump them to another conference and can still play women's lacrosse, but you don't have the expense of flying to California every other month.
What do you think, kind of as an add-on to that, when you look at NIL and the transfer portal, in addition to obviously this conference realignment, college sports has been completely blown up. What do you think when the dust settles? I know a lot of people think there may be one or two conferences left, but from a competitive standpoint, when you look at, again, NIL and the transfer portal and how kids are in and out of that, is it going to, it is going to change. It's already changed, but what do you think? Do you think the change will be for the better as you look at the college landscape?
NIL, and I'm so tired of saying this because I think I've said it for the last 2 years now, NIL is the wild, wild west, and I keep waiting for it not to be.
Right.
And it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to have revenue sharing for the athletes with the NIL. I don't begrudge them that money at all because we know that they put in the time and they put in the work, and college athletics would not be as successful without their hard work and their success. I realize that. Having said that, there's got to be rules. There's got to be some kind of regulation, and I don't know where that's going to come from because it's the have and have-nots, as we know, and a school like Ball State, for example. Ball State can recruit great players, and they have great freshman and sophomore years, and then they transfer.
Right. Yep.
Because they have better NIL opportunities at a bigger school with a bigger conference. And again, I don't begrudge them that at all. But you hate to see conferences like the MAC and the Sun Belt and some of those other conferences, Horizon. You hate to see them become feeder systems. You hate to see them become AAA teams for the big leagues. And that's what I think somehow, and my pay grade is not at the point where I can, make that decision, but you would think that there would be some way to protect some of these non-Power 5 schools, protect them so they can still have great seasons and great players without necessarily losing them automatically when that player has a breakout year.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know the answer to that. I would hope that somewhere along the way that there will be some kind of regulation or at least, some kind of system so that these other conferences don't become, feeder systems.
Yeah.
Right now they are. And, and that's what you hate to see. I mean, 2 years ago, Ball State had a great running back. He transferred to UCLA.
Yep.
So there you go.
Yeah. Hey, tell me about your time at ESPN. Did you go to ESPN from Channel 13?
From Channel 13, I went to my first full-time sports job was with Sports Channel America.
Okay.
Which was kind of the network, if you will, for Sports Channel regionals. If you remember, back in the day, there was, Sports Channel Indiana, Sports Channel Chicago, Sports Channel Bay City or Bay Area. Those eventually became Fox Sports regionals. Now they become Bally Sports regionals. And with Bally and Diamond trying to figure out their finances, we don't know what to call some of these regionals. But that was my first full-time job, was being an anchor for Sports Channel America. And we had a nightly sports newscast very similar to Sports Center. And we do highlights and we would throw to some of the regionals if their game was wrapping up. And so it was very similar to what they were doing at Sports Center. So that was really my first job. Then I came back to Cincinnati. I was very fortunate. It was the '96 Olympics. And so I got to cover the Olympics for not only our NBC affiliate in Cincinnati, but also for NBC News Channel, which fed stories to the local affiliates around the country. And then ESPN saw my work on NBC News Channel, and I was able to be there for the launch of ESPN News. They were looking for anchors for ESPN News. So I was very fortunate to get in and most of my time there was on ESPN News. I would anchor Sports Centers on the weekends, but most of the time I was ESPN News anchor.
And those were the relatively early days of women in sports and sports journalism, sports broadcasting. What was that experience like on the national level for you?
It was a lot of fun. And yes, I know everybody has read all the books about, it was kind of like an Animal House. And maybe it was early. I did not see that. I have an ESPN banner, when there's a game that the ESPN is covering, and there's always like a big ESPN banner. And at ESPN, we used to sign them for a charity so they could auction it off. And I have one of those banners that we all signed. And on that banner are 5 women. It was Chris McHenry, Ham Ward, Linda Cohn, Robin Roberts, and me. Mm-hmm. And out of about 54, 55 anchors that we had at that particular time, there were 5 women. And those 5 women, and we all signed that banner, and I still have it up in my living room today because it meant so much that we were doing what we wanted to do, what we loved to do. ESPN gave us the opportunity to do that, and as we know from that point on, they've hired obviously so many more women who are doing amazing work at ESPN. But I did an interview for one of my classes with Pam Ward, and she said, we were kind of pioneers, weren't we? And I go, yeah, I mean, obviously there were many women who were at ESPN who went before us, but the 5 of us who were there when I was there, it meant something. And we had our own little sorority, and we kind of gathered in Robin's office every once in a while and, talked about the day. But, it was just a great experience. If you're a sports fan, boy, that's where you want to be. That's
cool. In terms of inspiration for you, I read that the late Phyllis George was an inspiration to you. And of course, she was certainly a pioneer for her time on CBS Sports and the NFL and all the things she did. Talk about, because you wrote a book, Playing Ball with the Boys, The Rise of Women in Men's Sports. Talk about that relationship and how important it was for you.
Phyllis George was one of these people that, when I was a kid growing up, she was one of the few, maybe the only woman that I saw doing what I wanted to do. I thought, oh, okay, I can put journalism and sports together, and I can actually make a job out of it. And that's really the first time that I realized that, okay, you can do this. Because back when she was on NFL Today, NFL Today in and of itself was groundbreaking, because usually the pregame show before kickoff at 1:00 was maybe 15 minutes. Yeah. Maybe 5 minutes. It was short, and then they went to the game and you were gone. And it was groundbreaking because it was really the first comprehensive pregame show. With Irv Crofts, Jimmy the Greek, Brent Musburger was kind of the ringmaster, and then of course Phyllis George. And every week Phyllis George would do a feature on a player. And this was the first time that we really got to know players as people. Because you see a football player and they've got this mask and they've got this helmet and they look like a gladiator, and this was the first time that we saw them like at a desk job or on their ranch, or you got to see them away from the field and you got to know them as people. And that really helped, I think, make the NFL popular, because now we put a face to a name to a number. And anytime that you do that, and anytime that you get to know these players, even today, social media, once you get to know these players, then you have an affinity for them, then you're going to follow them. And so, she was really the first one that I saw that was doing what I wanted to do. And I had interviewed Phyllis a couple of times before, previewing the NFL Today. So I had met her before. Of course, she was First Lady of Kentucky for a while. So I had interviewed her, but to be able to have this like back and forth interviews, chats with her on email, and have her talk about her time at the NFL today, and it wasn't as rosy as it may have seemed. And she and Jimmy the Greek famously had feuds going on, and and she talked about that they were able to really make up and reconcile their differences before he passed away. And so that was really the first time that I really had the idea that, okay, I can use journalism and I can cover sports. And so again, that kind of clicked in, my little 8-year-old brain. I go, okay, we can do this. We can do this. And so that, I think, was really the first time that because I was always, as a kid, I was always passionate about sports, but this was a way that I could put them both together, which is kind of neat.
Yep. Much more ahead with Betsy Ross as we continue the Business and Beyond podcast. We'll talk about the early days growing up in Connersville and a lot more when the Business and Beyond podcast returns.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is Betsy Ross. Betsy's the president of Game Day Productions, a sports and entertainment company, also a longtime news and sports anchor at the local and national levels, and a Hoosier native, right, Betsy? Connersville?
Connersville Spartan, absolutely. State champs twice.
What was great? Because sports, in particular basketball, in a place like Connersville, big gym, was big back then. What was growing up in Connersville like for you?
It was really a great experience. Connersville is one of these cities that, of course, in the 70s, 60s and 70s, it was industrial smokestack.
Yeah.
And, the city was booming. And, as we all know, everything revolves around your high school basketball. And so, we would fill that 5,000 seat gym just about every Friday, Saturday night. And it was just so much fun to have something that the entire community would rally around, and still does. I mean, it's still really the heart of what Connersville is and what it does. But, they think about the foresight that these builders, these planners, these architects had to build a gymnasium like that, that, seats 5,000, very similar to Newcastle's, the same design. Newcastle's is bigger, but think about that. I mean, that's 50 plus years old.
Yeah.
And it looks brand new today. I mean, it looks as new. They just, less than 10 years ago, they redid the whole floor. I mean, they took everything up, they took it down to the gravel and rebuilt it. And it was just so fun to see how it was built and, the work that went into it with that facility and so many that we have in Indiana. They look just as new now as the day that they were built. And, what a wonderful place, what a fun place that was to see, and still is, to see basketball.
Yeah. I reflect on that. And you talk about places like Connersville and Marion and Newcastle, Richmond, these industrial cities whose economies were really strong and really vibrant, and their high school basketball was vibrant. They've all, had tough transitions economically, a lot of job loss and those types of things, and are really looking to rebound. So and that tie between, sports, basketball, and manufacturing in Indiana's case, I think is very real and really part of the fabric of those communities.
And as long as basketball plays such an important part in our communities, I think it will always be that way. We were so fortunate to have Matt Howard from Connersville that, made such a splash at Butler. And that was one of these things that the entire community really rallied around that family. His dad's longtime postman, and they made sure that the family could get down to Houston for the Final Four.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire community came together to make sure. And I do have to tell a side story about Matt Howard and his dad. Everything that they did for the community, Brad Stevens, of course, coach, we were having our bicentennial in 2013 parade, the whole thing. And so Brad Stevens said, yeah, I'll come and I'll be in the parade. Great. It's mid-June. So funny thing, week before our parade, Brad Stevens gets named as the coach of the Celtics.
The Celtics, yeah.
And so we all go, wow, that was fun for a while. And so he literally flies to Boston, has his news conference in Boston that Friday, calls up the Howards and says, I'll be there for the parade.
Oh, wow.
He left Boston, flew back in probably to Indianapolis or Dayton. Matt went to pick him up. And Brad Stevens came and he promised he was going to be in our parade, and he was at our parade. As luck would have it, it poured down rain. It poured down rain that day. Didn't matter. He was sitting in that convertible and he was waving. He was there. He talked to the media beforehand. He gave us all a quick interview. And I will forever be a Brad Stevens fan just because of what he did for Connersville. He didn't have to do that. We would have all said, oh, well, we understand. It's okay. It's okay if you don't come. You got bigger things. But he left Boston. He came to Connersville. He was in that parade. I will always be a fan of his because of what he did for the Howards and for their hometown of Connersville. It was just amazing. That's
great. Hey, tell me about Game Day Productions. What company's all about? What do you have going on?
Oh, a little bit of everything. We started it in 2002, and we kind of started it as a traditional, if you will, PR company, and we wanted to specialize in sports. Our first client was the Flying Pig Marathon, a big 40,000 people running event that we have the first weekend in May. We still have Flying Pig Marathon as our client, but probably by now, maybe it's 60-40 non-sports related to sports related clients, because the needs grow and you talk to clients and they have other interests. But we do still do a lot of sports. We work with the Cincinnati Reds Community Fund. We work with the Joe Burrow Foundation. We work with the Sam Hubbard Foundation, a couple of the Bengals players. We also work with a lot of the travel and tourisms that go on here in our area. And we probably specialize more in PR events and just working with clients on getting their word out, activating what their sponsorships are, especially now. So many of our clients, so many companies, they just don't write a check out of the goodness of their heart to say, okay, we'll sponsor you. No, they want something for their money. The days of those charity checks are gone now. They want something for their money. So we help activate a lot of those sponsorships to make sure that they get their return on their investment that they're going to be making, whether it's in an event, whether it's in an organization or what. We just help them make sure that they get their ROI.
Betsy Ross, it has been a real treat to catch up with you and to see all that you continue to do. I know you're teaching, I think, both at Notre Dame and IU as well, and sharing your knowledge with the younger generation. Been a real treat. Best wishes to you, and thanks for all you do.
Gary, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Betsy Ross, president of Game Day Productions, Cincinnati-based firm, and also, of course, a longtime news and sports anchor as well. My guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC, a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.